Back in 2018, I made one of the biggest decisions of my gaming career. I decided to buy a PS4. I bought the console so that I could play Horizon Zero Dawn, which had come out the year before. I was not disappointed, as Horizon was amazing and is still one of my favorite games to this day. This decision opened me up to a whole new world of PlayStation exclusives. I got to experience the adventures of Nathan Drake and embody the full power of the God of War. These quickly became some of my favorite games, and I was excited to see what else the PlayStation lineup had for me. Later in the year, Insomniac released Marvel's Spider-Man, and boy was it great. I remember feeling like a true vigilante, as I would come home from my day job as a software engineer, and then would proceed to boot up my PS4 and protect the streets of New York as Spider-Man. When I finally got my hands on a PS5 in 2021, I quickly picked up Spider-Man Miles Morales, and then it proceeded to collect dust on my shelf for the next 2 years. I kept wanting to play it, but life gave me excuse after excuse not to, and I just never did. But now, with Spider-Man 2 close to release, I decided that it's now or never. So, I finally played Spider-Man Miles Morales. Spider-Man Miles Morales takes place in the same location as the main game and utilizes the same map as Marvel's Spider-Man. However, New York gets a fresh coat of paint in this game, as it takes place during the Christmas season, and the entire city is covered in snow. I love a game set on Christmas. It's just such a cool time and gives a unique setting for a game. It worked so well for Arkham Origins in the Arkham series, and it works great here as well. The setting is absolutely perfect for the family-centric story that the game tells. Along with the blanket of snow, you can see a number of Christmas decorations across the city, as well as throughout Miles' apartment. The activities in the open world are very similar to the main game, including bases to infiltrate and take down, collectibles to find, crimes in progress to stop, and training challenges. These side activities were good enough and provided a variety of tasks to do apart from the main story. Where the game truly shines, just like its predecessor, is making you feel like a superhero juggling the many responsibilities you have. I found myself several times heading to an objective or collectible when all of a sudden a crime pops up, leading me to take a quick detour to put a stop to it. This style of open world works so well for a superhero game, and pairs really well with the fantastic web swinging that the games are known for.
We need to get out of here. I can only carry some of you.
The story in Miles Morales seems a lot more focused on the relationships between Miles and his family and friends. And while I loved the story of Marvel's Spider-Man, the Miles story just seemed to resonate with me a little more and felt more intimate in a way, with its core focus being on family. You can even see the influence of this in the side missions, as a good portion of them are designed to further develop Miles' family, with you collecting time capsules that contain items from Miles and Finn's past, each one of them holding a little more detailed look into their relationship. The Prowler missions have you searching for sounds throughout the city that have some type of connection with the history between Miles' parents and his uncle. Both of these missions further develop these characters, thus deepening the world surrounding Miles and even adds to Miles' character. There's even a side mission at the end that has you going on a scavenger hunt created by Miles' dad, fleshing out his dad's character more and even giving Miles some closure. These missions so perfectly pair with the fact that two of the main antagonists are Miles' uncle Aaron, who is the Prowler, and his friend Finn, who's the Tinkerer. And while we did see something similar with the main Spider-Man game, with Peter's mentor, Dr. Octavius, being the main villain, the relationships here with Miles and his friends and family seemed much more explored, especially when including what these side missions add. Miles' relationship with Finn seems so much stronger than Peter's and Octavius. With a deep and rich history, it really steals the show, as they really appear to be on the same side, just fighting in different ways. The story was obviously much shorter, but it didn't feel rushed or underdeveloped. I honestly loved this story. I thought it was written very well and had a strong focus on the characters, and the ending even made me tear up a little.
Okay. How's it looking? Whoa.
One of the coolest parts about this game though was that we got to play as a Spider-Man that's just starting out his career. In the main game, Peter has been Spider-Man for a while. He's established and is a seasoned professional. He's already been through many battles with his foes, and there's already an established relationship between Spider-Man and the many villains. You can even see throughout the story of the game the effect that being Spider-Man has had on his many relationships. This was perfect for that game and really isn't something that's explored much in the movies, so it was nice to see here. The Miles Morales game, however, follows Miles as he adjusts to the trials that acting as a hero for the many can cause, and it nails it. From the oversized suit that you start with, to the many mistakes that Miles makes throughout the game. Genki being your man in the chair also adds to this as well, as he develops an app for Miles that allows him to gain a following in the city as the new Spider-Man. You can tell the developers took time to consider this in everything. You can really see this in the side missions, as some people are very hesitant to accept help from the new Spider-Man, forcing Miles to prove himself. It's cool though to see these new relationships form as Miles helps out the many people in the city. Throughout the game, you can really see the people of Harlem accepting Miles as their Spider-Man, culminating in the final act when the people actually claim him as their Spider-Man. The game does a great job of allowing Miles to really come into his own and separate himself from Peter's shadow. Other games and even movies seem to struggle with this, but Spider-Man Miles Morales does it beautifully. Honestly, the decision to give Miles his own game ahead of the second installment in the main franchise is the best decision that Insomniac could have made. It allowed them to not only flesh out the character, but also allowed them to really develop his mechanics to make him feel unique and allow him to stand out from Peter. This is something that I would have loved to see in the Arkham games with the non-Batman playable characters. After playing this, I now feel just as connected to Miles as I do to Peter, and I enjoy playing as both of them as they both feel really unique. This lines up perfectly with the release of the new game, as we will get to play as both of them, and the game can now focus on developing the story and further developing both characters rather than having to spend a large amount of time just developing Miles' backstory.
I gotta end this.
The combat in Spider-Man Miles Morales was surprisingly innovative, especially for it being a smaller spin-off game. Combat in the main game was great, drawing inspiration from the Arkham games, but adding a lot more depth and variation to match Spider-Man's abilities. The combat really leans into Spider-Man's agility as you dodge enemies' attacks quickly and can bounce off them to do some major damage in the air. Spider-Man Miles Morales combat feels just as good, as it brings over the same core combat system used in the main game, but puts its own spin on things by adding a few major additions via the Venom attacks. Pretty early in the story, it is revealed that Miles has a whole set of powers that Peter does not, including bioelectricity, which he calls Venom, not to be confused with the character Venom, who is one of Spider-Man's main villains, which will appear in the new Spider-Man 2 game. The combat advantages that come with these Venom abilities include a Venom punch that deals massive damage to a single enemy, as well as stunning that enemy and the surrounding enemies with bioelectricity. Along with this, you get a number of crowd control abilities, like the Venom Smash, which is a powerful electric slam into the ground that stuns and knocks back your enemies, the Venom Jump, which stuns and launches enemies into the air, opening them up for aerial attacks, the Venom Dash, which sends you charging towards an enemy as you electrify them and throw them into the ground, or even at other enemies, and finally, the Mega Venom Blast, which utilizes all three Venom bars to unleash a blast of energy that's capable of knocking out a huge crowd of enemies. These new powers add whole new strategies and playstyles to the already diverse moveset that Peter had in the main game, like web striking into a group of enemies and then using a Venom Jump to get them all in the air, as you then proceed to knock out one of the enemies with a swift punch before jumping off them and doing the same thing to the next enemy over and over again, all before any of them managed to even hit the ground. This was my go-to move, and the satisfaction of pulling it off was fantastic. I especially liked using this on encounters where the criminals were robbing a store, as it lined up perfectly with the fact that they were all grouped in such a small convenience store. Another useful strategy I found myself using was utilizing the Venom Dash to quickly change my position. The dash seems to be a little bit faster than the web strike and is also unblockable. This made it a great tool to move towards a group of thugs on a building while swinging through the air, or even just move across the fighting area area to focus on a new group of enemies. Once you unlock the third Venom bar and the Mega Venom Blast, you're faced with a new choice to consider. Do I save up my Venom bars and use this super powerful attack that's likely to take out the majority of enemies in this encounter all at once? Or do I use the smaller Venom attacks to pick off the more difficult enemies and ensure that I don't die in the process of saving them up? This is a choice that I really felt in the final boss fight against Finn, as I would try to save up all 3 bars but was constantly having to drain them to get my health back because I sucked at dodging all of her attacks. In the end, I found out that it was better to just use the smaller Venom attacks as I got them to ensure I was doing a good amount of damage to her. These strategies led me to thinking differently, and in some cases, even thinking more than when I was playing as Peter. Don't get me wrong, I was not playing mindlessly when I was playing as Peter. I still gave thought to when to use my special attacks and which enemies I should focus the finishers on, but the variety that Miles added with his new powers got me to think a lot more. Is there a big guy with a shield? I should wait until I can take advantage of that. Is there a quick enemy that can dodge my attacks? I should not bother trying to attack them then until I can hit them with a Venom dash. I even found myself less likely to go swinging in with my fist first, since dodging attacks gave you a steady supply of Venom. So like some enemies, like the brutes that carried a shield and staff, it was a better strategy to let them attack you and just keep dodging until you have enough Venom energy to hit them with a powerful attack. All of this made the combat interesting and fun despite the similarities with the main Spider-Man game. Miles' moveset is similar enough to be familiar, but different enough to offer a level of reward for digging into the specifics. The stealth in the main Spider-Man game left a little to be desired, especially when being compared to the deep stealth combat presented in the Arkham games. This may be due to the fact that stealth seems less important in the Spider-Man games, due to the fact that most stealth encounters can be beaten as regular combat encounters if you fail and are caught, since Spider-Man can easily handle enemies with guns, compared to Batman, who has no real way to counter ranged attacks. I remember feeling as though the stealth in the main game was just not quite there. The gadgets and environments provided some variety, but there was only a few takedowns available, and if you were caught, there's really no way for Spider-Man to get back into stealth mode, and there are no enemies that specifically challenge any stealth skills, like an enemy that can't be taken down via perch takedown, or enemies that constantly look on the ceilings or rafters for Spider-Man. The stealth in the Miles Morales game, though, seems to be a step in the right direction, adding Miles' new camouflage ability. This ability makes Miles invisible to enemies and allows you some unique stealth opportunities, as well as the ability to get back into stealth if caught. This does improve the stealth a little, but the core issues from the main game are still present. They do introduce enemies later in the story that can negate the camouflage using their heat signature goggles. However, they don't really look up, so as long as you're on the ceiling or rafters above, they don't really pose an issue. I would love for these games to delve deeper into stealth, and we'll have to see what they do in the next game. They could probably improve it simply by pulling more inspiration from the Arkham games, which is where the games seem to take a lot of inspiration from anyway. Arkham's stealth gameplay is amazing, and throughout the series, it continues to get better and better as they continue to innovate and refine the base gameplay that was introduced in Arkham Asylum, all the way to what we eventually see in Arkham Knight. Arkham Knight is stealth gameplay at its best, and I think the biggest reason for the success is a strong foundation combined with a huge variety of options. When playing a Predator map in Arkham Knight, it literally feels like a puzzle with multiple solutions. For each tool that Batman has, the enemies will have some type of counter for it. Batman uses vantage points to perform inverted takedowns on enemies. The enemies introduce mines that are placed on the vantage points, as well as special enemy types that can scan the vantage points for Batman's heat signature. Batman can use the grates to sneak below an enemy before taking them out. The enemies counter this by starting to throw bombs in the grates. Batman can use detective vision to spot enemies and plan his attacks. Well, they added special enemy types that can jam the signal, making detective mode useless, and even enemies that can track the signal when you're using detective mode to find your location. The stealth gameplay is filled with these checks and balances to make sure you can't just spam one tactic over and over again. It forces you to think about how you're going to plan your approach to the problem and what steps you're going to use to solve it. It really is a puzzle, but the best part is that there's not only one solution to the puzzle. The variety of gadgets at your disposal make it so that you can tackle the problem in your own way. I would love for the Spider-Man games to feel more like this, because right now there's really no checks or balances. You could technically just use the perch takedown on every enemy you come across, if you're patient enough. There's simply not enough variation, and the enemies do not have enough countermeasures to force you to use the variation that's there. Now, I will acknowledge the fact that the Arkham series has had 4 games to refine and add to the formula, so they have a bit of an advantage here. And the encounters are pretty clearly divided into standard combat encounters and stealth predator encounters, which is easier to develop these variations for, versus the Spider-Man games that has a more open approach and lets any encounter be stealth or a combat encounter, with stealth being more of a suggestion in most cases. However, I still think that the Spider-Man games could draw more inspiration from the Arkham games in this regard. I'm not saying that Spider-Man stealth should feel exactly like Batman stealth, because I realize they're 2 different characters, and honestly, it makes sense that the encounters in Spider-Man allow you to choose stealth or standard combat, because it seems to fit more with Spider-Man's character. But I think there's still a balance that can be struck to make the stealth gameplay more engaging. Alternatively, maybe this is a case where tacking on a secondary type of gameplay like stealth is actually a mistake and only detracts from the game by taking resources from polishing the other parts of the gameplay.
You're not gonna keep pushing people around, Alexi. I'm not.
The boss fights in the main Spider-Man game were definitely a highlight of the game, and the fights in this game are definitely comparable. Since the game was much shorter, there were only 4, or more like 3.5 boss fights, since the Rhino fight at the beginning was more of a tutorial boss fight. I think here is probably where the effect that the length and size of the game is seen most, as these boss fights were great, but there's just so few of them and not really a lot of villains to play with, especially when compared to the main game's boss fights that just had so much more to work with and so much more time to work with them. Even pairing up some of the villains for some truly memorable encounters, which worked really well. I mean, the fight between Electro and Vulture was legendary, as you had to balance all of the aerial attacks that they were both throwing at you all at once. It really made you feel like Spider-Man. The boss fights in Spider-Man Miles Morales held their own though, and I think the devs did a good job with what they had. The boss fights included 2 fights against Rhino. The first served as a nice intro to your Venom powers, but didn't really do anything truly amazing to stand out. The best part about this one was really what it did for Miles' character, as he has to face Rhino on his own without the help of his mentor Peter, who is badly wounded. The next boss fight that you encounter is, funnily enough, Rhino for the second time. This fight with Rhino was a lot more interesting and challenging, as he has a new set of armor which makes him impervious to your Venom attacks. This forces you to fight him without any of your special abilities, having to wear down his armor enough to defeat him. The boss fight was broken up into 2 stages. The first has you avoiding Rhino's attacks while also fighting off the Roxxon guards until you can dodge his charge and jump on top of him, steering him into a destructible obstacle. This was a fun enough challenge, but was very similar to the way you fight him at the beginning of the game. The next stage, however, is where it gets interesting, as Rhino starts throwing tanks at you, leaving engines that you need to charge with a Venom punch before hurling them at Rhino. On top of this, Rhino starts attacking using Venom suppressing area effects, which are pretty difficult to avoid. This leads in you having to balance charging and throwing the engine while still dodging the incoming attacks. And this is really where these games are at their best. I'll admit, sometimes I get frustrated and annoyed with the challenge of dealing and balancing the chaos, but in the end, when you manage to successfully do it, it feels all the more satisfying. Again, it really makes you feel like a superhero handling a million problems at once. The Prowler fight is the next boss fight, and it holds a bigger emotional weight than the Rhino fight does, as Miles is forced to fight his uncle. In a way, Miles' uncle represents what Miles could become, if not for his compassion and his heart to put others' needs first. This is mirrored in the fight, as the Prowler gives you a taste of your own medicine, as he cloaks himself, leaving you fully reliant on your spider sense to avoid his attack. He also later on in the fight uses hologram tech similar to the tech that Miles uses to clone himself and force you to fight several Prowlers at once. The fight itself was pretty fun and challenging to play. It was a nice variation from the Rhino fights, where the Rhino fights are more like David and Goliath battles, with you facing an enemy so much bigger and stronger than you. The Prowler fights feel more intimate, with a more hand-to-hand style. The Prowler's many gadgets provide a variety of attacks, which helps keep the fight interesting and provides a nice challenge. The final boss fight against the Tinkerer basically takes everything from the Prowler fight and turns it up to 11. Much like the Prowler, Finn has a number of attacks at her disposal. She's very fast and can attack multiple times in succession, forcing you to really nail your dodge timing. I found this to be a great challenge that definitely took me a few tries to get right. However, when you get it, it feels great, and Finn's attack speed really affects the pacing of the fight, making it feel so much faster and intense than any of the other fights in the game. She also has a plethora of gadgets at her disposal that she uses throughout the fight, like her giant laser which you can fire at you, or her giant set of saw blades that rush across the screen, forcing you to dodge. There's nothing quite like the feeling of a perfect dodge, and these giant saw blades seem to amplify that feeling as you see Miles leap over them, barely avoiding the sharp edge that would otherwise shred him to pieces. The fight has multiple stages, with each stage progressively getting more chaotic, and the final stage having a ton going on the screen all at once. All the chaos really makes you feel like Spider-Man as you weave and dodge all the attacks, all leading to that final blow which feels so satisfying. Like I said before, these Spider-Man games seem to be at their best when there's so much going on that you have to navigate, but as a player, it can be really frustrating to just be thrown into the chaos right off the bat. Insomniac, however, seems to have nailed this with this boss fight, as it slowly introduces more and more things to keep track of until eventually you're avoiding lasers, area effect bombs, saw blades, sword attacks, and energy blast all at once. All of this culminates in a truly unforgettable and epic boss fight that is a perfect ending to the game. One of the last things to address is the suits, which is honestly one of the best parts about the Spider-Man games. The suits in this game were pretty good. Some of my favorites include the 2099 suit and the cat suit, obviously. Miles' main suit is cool, but it feels like it could have been a little bit better, especially when they absolutely nailed Peter's main suit in the main game. Peter also has the advantage of just having more content to draw from, with them recreating all the movie suits and a lot of the suits from the comics. The suit ability that was found in the main Spider-Man game has been replaced with the extra slot for suit mod in this game. This is probably due to the fact that Miles already has extra abilities with his powers, so having a suit ability on top of that would just be overkill. So switching it out with a more passive suit mod makes sense. I honestly don't know which one I prefer, and I'm interested to see where they take this in the new game, since Peter does not have Miles' abilities. The other characters' designs are middling at best. Honestly, I am not a huge fan of the villain designs in these new Spider-Man games. They all seem too techy and similar to each other. The Prowler just looks like a Roxxon guard, but with a special paint job. The Prowler's look in the Spider-Verse was awesome, with his iconic purple cape and his sinister and almost haunting mask. The design was simple for the most part and focused the tech aspect of his character all in his gauntlets, with the majority of his costume being clean and fitting the original design of the character. And I wish the game would have gone down a similar route. The Tinker's tech was cool, but the outfit felt generic. The decision to gender swap the character from the original in the comics worked well for the story and provided a nice connection to Miles. This also provided the ability to create a whole new design for the character, as the character is depicted normally as an old man with glasses and normal work clothes. Instead, we just got more of the same. The Tinker looks just like any other bad guy in this video game universe, with so much tech surrounding her that you really can't tell what's going on. I suspect the Marvel movies are to blame for this, as their push to make all of the costumes look the same seems to have carried over to these games. It seems like more and more superhero costumes are leaning more into the add subtle hints of the character to a generic costume rather than allowing each character to be wildly unique. Again, I'm gonna bring the Arkham games up for comparison. Look at the villains in those games. None of them look the same. Sure, they use the same art style and look like they belong in the same world, but their costumes are wildly different. Two-Face wears his iconic suit that's split down the middle to represent his dual sides. Scarecrow looks menacing and terrifying with a cloth mask appearing to be stitched to his face. Killer Croc is a monstrous creature with giant crocodile teeth that looks gigantic when placed next to Batman. And what makes them all work is that they take what's unique about them in the comics and lean into that. They don't necessarily think about how it practically makes sense. They're more interested with staying true to the character and making the character stand out against the rest. There's never a case where one villain looks like any random mob enemy. They look unique and clearly stand out from the chaff. I just wish that the Spider-Man games would lean more into the comic designs and what makes them more unique. I mean, they obviously know how to design a killer suit inspired by both the movies and comics. Just look at Peter's suit in the main game. And while Miles' suit could be better, at least it doesn't suffer from this over tech issue and still manages to retain what made it unique in the comics. Overall, Spider-Man Miles Morales was a great game. It expands on the main game quite a bit and takes time to develop Miles' character as well as some of the supporting characters. The length of the game was shorter, but I almost found it refreshing and would honestly love to see more games this length come out. It's the perfect size to develop some core ideas and tell a great story and not overstay your welcome. The benefit of the size was really seen in the side missions, as I didn't feel overwhelmed and didn't get that feeling that they were becoming stale. The story the game told was great, and I cannot wait to see Miles return in the next game. So, I finally played Spider-Man Miles Morales, and honestly, I'm so glad I did. Hey guys, thanks for watching. Again, I know this is a little different from our normal video essay style. We are currently working really hard on the next video essay and have finally finished the script and recorded the voiceover, so we're getting close to finishing that up. Be sure to subscribe if you're interested in that and don't want to miss out. We're really trying to spend time on the writing and research for these video essays to make sure they're the best they can be, and so that's why they're taking so long to make, and why I started doing these smaller videos to fill in the gaps. This is the second video in the new So I Finally Played series. Would love to hear from you guys if you have any suggestions on must-play games for this series. You can let us know in the comments or head over to our Discord. The link's in the description. As always, big shout out to our patrons, JRev and CC. We really appreciate it. I really enjoyed playing Spider-Man Miles Morales and making this video. Spider-Man's just such a fun character, and these games are just so great. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Spider-Man games. Are you planning on picking up the new one? Should we pick up the new one and do a video on it? Let us know. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.